And my question has two parts. One is first part is that why God first of all gave us some difficulties, some illnesses, some diseases. What's the reason for this? And the second part is that do we pray just for during our difficulties, or we pray that it's command and order? Is a difference? Second question is we pray just for our difficulty. For example, we are we are in trouble. We pray just for this, or this is a command, maybe order to have relation between God and us. Why we pray here?
So is the prayer a command of God, or is it something that we should only we are sick and we have some calamities, some problems?
He's trying to refer to also that do we pray only when we need prayers? Whether we don't need anything and we are well-being or fine, do we drift from God, or should we pray the time, or should we continue to pray only when we are sick or need?
Maybe in Islam, everything comes from God, and everything comes from God. Illness, cure, everything comes. And we have a destiny. God gives us 60 or 70 or 100 years life. And we will die. It is an inevitable end. Then, sometimes we will die with an illness, sometimes with an accident. If we are aware of these destiny of things, yes, in Islam, the illnesses are the time of the worship. Sometimes in Islam, in the sunset time, we pray Maghrib. Before the sunrise, we pray morning prayer. These are very scheduled times, 5 times a day. But sometimes, when we got a problem, that means this is the time of praying to God. Right? To remember God. It's like, to my understanding.
Any comments?
I'm reminded of the book, very popular New York Times bestseller, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Harold Kushner was the author. I guess he still is. It's funny is that if you ask people about that book who've read it, 99% of people will tell you that the title of that book is Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. And actually the title of the book is When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Because Rabbi Kushner's, it's actually a rabbi, Rabbi Kushner's thesis is simply that pain and suffering is inevitable. It's in the human condition. It's a part of the world in which we live. There are things that we can't understand because, as Ms. Soga said, we are the created, we are not the creators. This is a part of the reality in the world in which we live. So the title of his book is When It Happens. So the point is, it's how we respond to the world in which we live. And that, I would argue, is why you have multiple traditions up here on this before you, because there are multiple answers to that question. It's when we respond that we have multiple answers, multiple truths to this question, that ultimately, I believe, is what religion is about. Religion is not about war and trying to see who's right. Religion is about giving us answers in a world that we have very little, we have so many questions and very little answers. And this gives us a perspective and a paradigm in which to see the world. So I get your question. We've been asking that question since we stood at the tree. We've been asking that very question. And we have, throughout time, come up with as many different answers as there are possibilities.
Your first question is a very difficult one, and I have to issue my standard disclaimer, which is Christians are all over the map on this, so I don't want to presume to speak for all Christians. One view that many find helpful is from the author Leslie Weatherhead, who wrote a book called The Will of God. And in his book, The Will of God, he suggested that God's will isn't just at one level, that there are different levels of God's will. And that what God finally wills is the kind of reconciliation that Ms. Soga so eloquently spoke of in her presentation, the reconciliation of ourselves with God and our own noblest ideals and in human community. But that may not happen in this lifetime. That may not happen in the short term. There may be things in the short term that thwart the will of God, although in the end, God's will finally be done. I find that personally to be a helpful starting point. I do not believe that everything that happens is the will of God. I think that we humans interfere with God's perfect will through our own free will and through our own ignorance and through a host of other things that are beyond our control. So I don't think God micromanages everything that happens in the universe, and every time somebody gets sick, it's because it was God's will that they be sick. I firmly believe that, as one of our creeds says, God's will is ever directed toward the good of God's children. And God never wishes ill on anyone. But, as Rabbi Schneider so well put it, regardless of whether that's ultimately what God would have happen, the reality of our world is that we do have these struggles. And so the question becomes how we deal with these struggles. That leads to your second question, which is a much easier one to answer. There's a beautiful passage where the Apostle Paul, or a writer in his name, says, "Pray without ceasing." And that reminded me very much of what you were saying, Dr. Sumer, about prayer being the remembrance, or perhaps our Buddhist friends would say the awareness of God at all times. And so, yes, we are commended always to be in communion with the divine, in good and in bad. It's just that we're more prone to do it, and to do it more fervently when we are in pain or in need.
All right, with that, I would like to conclude the panel because we are out of time now. I would like to thank you, our speakers, and I invite our audience to give a warm round of applause to our speakers. Thank you.